It was one of those golden afternoons when everything seemed softer than it really was. I'd escaped to a quiet cafe downtown, hoping for 10 minutes of peace before diving back into another exhausting workday. The smell of coffee and vanilla pastries wrapped around me like a blanket, and for a brief moment, I forgot the world outside. Then I heard a voice. Familiar, warm, and impossible to mistake. Olivia? I turned, and there he was. Paul. My old college friend. The one who made group projects bearable and late-night study sessions somehow fun. He looked almost the same, just older in the kind of way that life does to people who've seen too much but still smile through it. "Wow, it's been forever," he said, that easy grin spreading across his face. I felt a rush of nostalgia, the kind that hits you without warning, pulling you straight back to a time when life felt simpler. "Paul, I'm great. Married, working too much, the usual," I replied, laughing. It was light, effortless, comfortable, until it wasn't. Because then, out of nowhere, he said it. "Yeah, I saw on social media. Congratulations, by the way. And, honestly, props to you. It takes guts to agree to something like that." I blinked. My smile froze midair. "Something like what?" I asked, my tone light but my chest tightening. Paul's smile faltered, his eyes darting away. And that's when everything started to shift, quietly, almost invisibly, but enough for me to feel it deep down. Something was wrong. Paul hesitated, his cheerful tone cracking just enough to make me notice. "Oh, I mean, the open relationship thing," he said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "I saw Eric's post about how you two were making it work." For a second, I couldn't even process what he'd said. The words floated in the air, absurd and heavy at the same time. "Open relationship?" I repeated, laughing softly. Too softly. "What post?" And that's when the silence fell. That awful, heavy silence that tells you the truth before anyone says it. Paul's eyes widened. "Oh no, Liv. Forget I said anything. I thought, he made it sound like you both agreed." I could see the regret all over his face, but the damage was already done. My stomach sank, my pulse quickened, and every sound around us suddenly felt too loud. Cups clinking, a door slamming, the hiss of the espresso machine. The world kept spinning, but mine had tilted off its axis. I forced a smile, one I'd perfected over the years. "It's fine, Paul, really." My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. I wrapped them around my coffee cup just to have something to hold on to. He mumbled another apology, but I barely heard it. Because in my head, 100 thoughts were colliding, none of them making sense. Eric had never mentioned anything like that. Ever. And yet somehow, everyone but me seemed to know. I don't even remember saying goodbye to Paul. I just remember stepping out of that cafe, the sunlight suddenly too bright, burning against my skin. The city sounds felt distant, like I was underwater and everyone else was moving in slow motion. I kept walking, past shop windows and strangers, clutching my phone like it held all the answers. But it didn't. My mind kept replaying his words. Open relationship. Over and over, until it stopped sounding like English and started feeling like betrayal. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. I opened Eric's profile out of reflex, though I barely used social media. I told myself it was nothing, just some misunderstanding. Paul must have mixed things up. But deep down, that little voice I always ignored whispered otherwise. Eric had been distant lately, too distracted, too secretive. Little things that didn't make sense started fitting together like cruel puzzle pieces. As I sat there, engine off, heartbeat racing, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't anger yet. Not fully. It was confusion laced with disbelief, the kind that makes your throat ache. Still, Beneath it all, something colder began to stir. A quiet certainty that whatever I was about to find out, it was going to change everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I told myself not to look, that nothing good ever comes from scrolling at midnight. But curiosity can be cruel when it's mixed with fear. So, I opened Eric's profile. There it was, a shiny, self-righteous post sitting right at the top of his feed. True love means freedom. Excited to explore this new chapter of honesty and openness with my amazing wife. My amazing wife. Me. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like gravity had turned personal. Hundreds of likes, comments from friends, coworkers, even distant cousins. People cheering him on as if he'd just cured cancer instead of rewriting the rules of our marriage without asking me first. So brave. You two are goals. I could barely read the words through the blur of disbelief. My throat tightened, a lump pressing hard against it. I stared at the screen, the glow of it reflecting off my tears. This was how I found out, through strangers applauding a lie. I sat there frozen. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that hums with all the things you never thought you'd have to question. I looked around our living room, the framed photos, the wedding picture on the shelf, the couch where we'd laughed about nothing just days ago. Every piece of it suddenly felt foreign, like I was living inside someone else's life, someone else's story. And maybe I was. When I finally confronted him, I wasn't shouting. I didn't throw the phone or demand answers like people do in movies. I just stood in the doorway, holding my phone like it was evidence from a crime scene. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was calm, too calm. Eric looked up from his laptop, unfazed, as if I'd interrupted him mid-email. "Oh, that," he said with a casual shrug. "It's just a post. You know how people exaggerate online." His tone was light, dismissive, like he was talking about a joke I didn't get. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. "You told the world we have an open relationship," I said, each word heavier than the last, without asking me. He sighed, rolling his eyes just slightly. "Relax, Liv. It's just talk. Everyone knows monogamy's outdated. I thought you'd understand." "Understand?" My blood went cold. I took a step closer, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. "Understand?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "You announced to the world that our marriage has rules I never agreed to." He leaned back, smirking, that condescending smile he used when he wanted to feel smarter than me. "It's not a big deal," he said. "Besides, who's going to believe you're upset about being wanted by more than one man?" That line hit like a slap, sharp and echoing. I felt something inside me snap, not loudly, not violently, but cleanly, like a thread finally breaking after holding too much weight. And that was the moment my love for him started to rot. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and realized how unfamiliar his face suddenly felt. The man in front of me wasn't my husband. He was a stranger wearing his skin. I'd spent years defending him, explaining away his selfishness as stress or ambition. But now, stripped of charm and excuses, I could finally see him for what he was. Someone who mistook manipulation for confidence. Someone who believed honesty only mattered when it benefited him. He went back to his laptop, as if our marriage hadn't just cracked open between us. That's when the silence changed. No longer awkward, but dangerous. I stood there, every part of me screaming to leave, but something held me still. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was disbelief. Or maybe it was the quiet promise forming in the back of my mind. If he wanted to play games in public, then that's exactly where I'd finish them. On my terms, my rules. When I finally walked upstairs, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the ring on my finger. It glinted under the soft lamplight, mocking, almost. I thought about the word freedom, the one he'd thrown around so easily. Freedom wasn't about betrayal or deceit. It was about truth. And if Eric wanted to preach about honesty, then he was about to learn what real honesty looked like. The next morning, the air in our house felt heavier, like even the walls knew something had changed. I brewed coffee out of habit, the bitter smell filling the kitchen as if it could wake me from this twisted dream. Eric had already left for work, leaving behind his usual trail of half-finished breakfast and self-importance. I stared at his empty mug and thought, you have no idea what's coming. But I needed proof. Something more than his arrogance and that stupid post. Something undeniable. That's when I called Nina. She worked with him, had known us both for years. I told myself it was just to ask about a project, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. Nina, can I ask you something personal? There was a pause on the line, the kind that hums with guilt. Liv, she said softly. I didn't want to get involved, but yeah. Eric's been seeing someone from the marketing team. He said you were fine with it, that you two were, evolving. Evolving, I repeated, my voice hollow. I could almost hear her wince. I thought you knew, she whispered. He talks about it like it's no secret. My laugh came out sharp and humorless. Yeah, well, apparently I'm the last to evolve. After we hung up, I sat in silence, the kind that vibrates in your bones. The truth had a taste, metallic, bitter, unforgettable. And right then, I made myself a promise. If he wanted to turn our life into a public performance, I was going to make sure the finale was unforgettable. That day, I became someone different, quieter, calmer, sharper. Every word I spoke, every move I made felt deliberate, like I was stitching together a new version of myself. I started collecting pieces of his lies the way detectives collect fingerprints. Screenshots of late-night messages, dinner reservations under fake names, photos tagged by accident. Each one was a small betrayal on its own, but together they painted the picture of a man who had built his ego on deceit. And for once, I didn't cry. I documented. I planned. It's strange how betrayal can wake you up. Suddenly, I noticed everything. The cologne that wasn't his, the shirt I'd never seen before, the way he smiled at his phone when he thought I wasn't watching. The universe has a cruel sense of humor. It always leaves clues for those brave enough to look. I'd spent years ignoring signs because I thought love meant trust. But love without respect is just self-delusion dressed up in pretty vows. At night, I'd lie beside him, pretending to sleep while my mind raced through possibilities. There was power in patience, I realized. Power in silence. He had made a fool of me publicly, but I wasn't going to rage or beg. No, I was going to choose my moment. And when I did, it wouldn't just hurt. It would leave a mark he could never erase. A few days later, I saw him get ready for another one of his private dinners. He sprayed too much cologne, hummed a song that wasn't even his style, and left his phone charging on the counter. Unlocked. I didn't have to look, but I did. One message sat at the top of the screen. Can't wait to see you tonight. She really has no clue. My heart didn't drop this time. It hardened. Every ounce of hurt turned into focus. I took screenshots, sent them to myself, and put his phone back exactly where it was. He'd never know. Not yet. The next morning, while he smiled through breakfast like nothing had happened, I looked at him differently. He wasn't a husband anymore. He was a project, a case study in arrogance. He thought I was too kind, too trusting to ever fight back. That was his first mistake. You seem quiet lately, he said, taking a sip of coffee. I smiled, the kind of smile that hides storms. Just thinking, I replied. About evolution, He laughed, oblivious. I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from laughing too. Because inside, the plan was already forming. Slow, methodical, perfect. If he wanted a performance, I was going to give him one he'd never forget. And the stage would be his own making. I'd let him believe everything was fine, let him dig deeper into his fantasy until he couldn't climb out. When I finally exposed him, it wouldn't just be a revelation. It would be justice, in its most poetic form. The night of the dinner arrived like a scene I'd rehearsed 1,000 times in my head. Eric called it a celebration of honesty. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. I wore the blue dress he loved, the one he said made me look soft, as if softness was something I should perform for him. I smiled in all the right places, poured wine, greeted his colleagues like the perfect wife he bragged about online. If anyone noticed the calm fire behind my smile, they didn't dare ask. The house glowed with candlelight and polite laughter. Eric was in his element, the charming host, glass in hand, performing sincerity like it was an art form. To love, freedom, and trust, the foundation of our marriage, he said, raising his glass. Everyone cheered, and I did too. I even leaned in and kissed his cheek, just to sell the illusion. My heart was steady, no shaking, no guilt. Just a quiet thrill that comes when you're seconds away from flipping the script. He looked so proud of himself, so untouchable. But arrogance has a way of blinding people right before they fall. "Oh yes," I said, meeting his gaze, my tone light but sharp. Freedom, such an inspiring word. A few people chuckled, thinking it was a playful remark. Eric smiled, utterly unaware that the entire room was about to witness the moment his empire of lies collapsed. He laughed, clinking his glass with mine. "See? That's why she's amazing," he said to the group, pride dripping from every syllable. His friends smiled, a few women exchanging glances I couldn't quite read. I stood there, still smiling, waiting for that perfect moment when silence would be louder than his charm. "Since we're all being honest tonight," I began, my voice smooth and steady, "I should probably say something too." The laughter around the table dimmed, replaced by a quiet hum of curiosity. Eric froze for half a second, just long enough for me to see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I held up my phone. "Eric forgot to mention," I said, my tone calm but cutting, "that while he's been preaching about freedom, he's also been enjoying it with someone from his office, without my knowledge. Or my consent." The room went still. Forks paused midair. Someone gasped. Eric's glass hit the table with a dull thud. His face drained of color. "What are you doing?" he hissed under his breath, his voice low and shaking. "What you should have done," I said. "Telling the truth." I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. His voice filled the room, smooth, confident, damning. "She'll never know. She's too busy playing wife." The words echoed against the walls, against his reputation, against every smug smirk he'd ever given me. And for the first time, Eric had nothing to say. Nothing at all. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Every tiny sound suddenly felt monumental. Eric's mouth opened, then closed again, like a man gasping for air. His colleagues avoided eye contact, pretending to check their glasses, their plates, anything but him. I stood there, steady, the same woman he'd underestimated, only now holding the power he thought I'd never take back. "Freedom looks different when the curtain's pulled back, doesn't it?" I said quietly. He tried to recover, reaching for some kind of charm that might save him. "Olivia, let's talk about this privately," he muttered, his voice tight, cracking at the edges. "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You wanted honesty in public. Let's stay consistent." My tone wasn't angry. It was final. that kind of calm that terrifies people more than shouting ever could. Around us, no one moved. No one spoke. Every single person in that room was witnessing the truth. Raw, undeniable, irreversible. I picked up my bag and my coat, my hand barely trembling. "Dinner's over," I said softly, my voice carrying through the stunned quiet. "You can explain your version of freedom without me." And with that, I walked out. The cool night air hit my skin like a baptism, sharp, clean, liberating. Behind me, the murmurs began, but ahead of me, for the first time in a long time, there was only silence. My silence. My freedom. The next morning, I woke up to the kind of quiet that feels earned. No buzzing phone, no anxious heartbeat waiting for an apology that would never come. Just stillness, and the faint satisfaction that justice had finally started to take shape. I brewed my coffee slowly, savoring the smell, the sound, the ritual of doing something just for me. Then I picked up the folder from the counter, filled with screenshots, messages, and evidence, and walked into my lawyer's office like a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for her own strength. He listened carefully as I told him everything, flipping through the pages like he was reading the script of a very expensive mistake. "Olivia," he said, looking up, "with what you have here, and that social media post, you're in a strong position. Defamation, emotional distress, public humiliation. You'll walk away with the house, assets, and a clean name." I smiled, not out of joy, but out of closure. "Good," I said. "He can keep his freedom. I'll keep everything else." It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance being restored. As I left his office, I felt lighter, taller somehow. My steps echoed on the marble floor, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's story. Eric had played his game in public, so I ended it there too. Let him deal with the whispers, the looks, the endless speculation at work. Me? I was done playing. I was rewriting. Word spreads fast in offices built on gossip and glass egos. Within days, Eric's perfect image began to crumble. His co-workers stopped laughing at his jokes. The same people who once called us relationship goals now whispered behind his back. The woman he'd risked everything for transferred departments. Apparently, she didn't find freedom quite as glamorous once it came with shame. And Eric? He tried to clean up the mess, deleting his post, pretending it had all been misunderstood. But you can't delete humiliation, not when it's earned. I didn't need to lift a finger. The universe was doing it for me, quietly and efficiently. Friends who once defended him started reaching out to me instead, offering support I didn't even ask for. My inbox filled with messages like, "You deserved better," and "Good for you, Liv." Every word felt like a stitch mending a part of me he'd torn. I wasn't vindictive. I was simply watching justice unfold in real time, and it was far more satisfying than anger ever could be. At night, I'd pour myself a glass of wine and sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker. I used to think revenge had to be loud, dramatic, fiery. But it doesn't. Sometimes it's quiet, graceful, and devastatingly efficient. It's signing papers with a steady hand while the man who underestimated you unravels in the background. And as each day passed, I realized that peace, real peace, was the most exquisite form of payback. The final meeting was almost anticlimactic. Eric sat across from me in the lawyer's office, his once confident posture now slumped, his suit wrinkled, his charm evaporated. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The silence between us said more than any apology ever could. When the papers were slid across the table, I signed them slowly, neatly, deliberately. Each stroke of the pen a quiet declaration that I was done being small for him. He hesitated before signing, his hand trembling slightly. For the first time, he looked like the one left behind. When we stood to leave, He tried to find words. "Live," he began, his voice breaking in a way I'd once have softened for. But not this time. "Don't," I said gently, not cruelly. "You had your version of freedom. This is mine." His lips parted, but nothing came out. And in that moment, I realized how deeply he'd mistaken silence for weakness. He never saw that it was the weapon I'd been sharpening all along. I walked out first, the sound of my heels on the tile echoing like a victory march. Outside, the air felt lighter, cool, forgiving. I looked up at the skyline, at the city that had witnessed both my unraveling and my rebirth. I didn't feel angry anymore, just free. Eric could keep his illusions, his excuses, his empty kind of freedom. I had something far better: dignity, peace, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that in the end, I'd rewritten the story he tried to tell for me. And this time, every word belonged to me. 6 months later, I sat at my new desk in a small but sunlit office downtown, the kind of place that smelled faintly of coffee and second chances. The contract in front of me wasn't just paperwork, it was proof that I'd started over. My name stood alone at the top: Olivia Harper. No attachments, no hyphens, just me. When I signed it, I smiled. Not the polite smile I used to wear for other people, but a real one. The kind that starts somewhere deep and feels like breathing again. My phone buzzed. It was Nina. Her voice came through bright and a little breathless. "He quit the firm," she said. "Couldn't handle the fallout." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the bustling street below. "Freedom has a price," I said softly, half to her, half to myself. She laughed. "If that's true, you got the better deal." And maybe I did. Because peace, I'd learned, doesn't come from revenge. It comes from finally being able to look in the mirror and recognize yourself again. That weekend, I found myself back at the same cafe where it all began. The smell of vanilla pastries hadn't changed, but everything else had. When Paul walked in, I almost laughed. It felt like life had circled back, only this time I was in control of the story. "Olivia," he said, grinning, "I owe you an apology for what I said that day." I shook my head, smiling. "Don't. You did me a favor." Paul looked at me for a moment, his expression gentle but curious. "You seem different," he said, stirring his coffee. "Happier." I smiled, letting his words settle. "I finally am," I admitted. "Turns out I just needed to close an open relationship I never signed up for." He laughed, softly, genuinely, and it felt good to join him. Not as the woman who'd been betrayed, but as someone who'd survived the fire and come out cleaner on the other side. There was no bitterness left, just gratitude for the lessons that hurt enough to teach me who I was. We talked for hours about old college memories, about how time has a way of sanding down the sharp edges of life. And as I listened, I realized how long it had been since I felt light. Not careless, but free. The kind of freedom that doesn't need to be announced online or justified to anyone. The kind that simply is. When the afternoon sun started to fade, he offered to walk me home, and for once, I didn't overthink it. I just said yes. As we walked through the familiar streets, I noticed how everything looked different now. Not because the city had changed, but because I had. The noise, the crowds, the chaos, none of it felt overwhelming anymore. I had learned how to stand still within it all. And that, I realized, was the real gift. The ability to move forward without carrying the weight of someone else's lies. When we reached the corner where our paths split, Paul smiled. "You really seem at peace, Liv," he said. "I hope I get there someday." I smiled back, feeling the warmth of the evening sun against my face. "You will," I said. "Just stop trying to fix what was never yours to hold." He nodded, and we said goodbye. The kind that doesn't ache, the kind that feels like a door closing gently instead of slamming shut. I watched him walk away, realizing how rare it was to end something without pain attached to it. I turned toward my new apartment, the city buzzing softly around me. The streetlights blinked on one by one, and with each step, I felt more grounded, more myself. No more pretending. No more waiting for someone else to define my happiness. The air smelled like rain was coming, and for the first time in a long while, that didn't bother me. Rain meant renewal. It meant everything old was finally being washed away. As I reached my building, I looked back once more at the city that had witnessed both my heartbreak and my rebirth. I smiled. Not the practiced kind, but the one that comes when you finally understand that peace isn't the absence of chaos. It's choosing yourself in the middle of it. And with that, I walked inside, free, composed, and radiant. My story, at last, was entirely mine.